All right, so hi Dave.
Dave!
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming. We're so excited. You're actually quite a celebrity here in Israel, you know?
Is that true? Why, how so?
Because we hear your name a lot and many people quote you and tell us, oh, Dave told us to, so...
If Dave says, then,
Dave says.
Yeah. Dave says,
Well,
jump in the ocean.
I guess from you never know. I think that's one of the coolest things about marketing, and just, you know, we're just, everybody's connected today, and so that I have no idea. Sometimes I think nobody's listening other than myself. So that's good to know. Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah. We fall into the same trap, but yeah, I'm sure it happens to you more often. So as you know, this podcast is taking place in Hebrew. So I hope your Hebrew is as polished as possible.
I've been practicing.
Good, since the bar mitzvah.
Yeah,
That's right.
good stuff. So
a bit of an introduction to you. So say hi to Dave, perhaps one of the most influencing gurus in tech B2B marketing today. Dave was the CMO of Drift, in charge of the tremendous growth Drift has back in the days, and their transformation into one of the, I think, noticeable brands in tech B2B, specifically with creating and leading the category of conversational marketing. Today, Dave is leading Privy, marketing for Privy, a rising star in e-commerce, and also, I don't know how you find the time, running the DGMG Community and podcast, serving tens of thousands of readers and listeners a month. So, hi, Dave. How are you?
Hi. Look. So, I think this all stems from, and I love the thing that you said at the end, which is like, I don't know how you find the time. I think it's actually the most important piece of this, and really anything, which is, this is what I love doing and what I love talking about. And so, I just had this conversation with my wife the other day because I did like an AMA on Instagram. It's join DGMG on Instagram, and somebody said, "How, you know, you have kids, you have a full-time CMO job. How do you find the time to do all this?" And the answer is, this is what I love talking about. This is what I think about. Like, I really am. There is no off switch, right?
Yeah.
If I get up to pee in the middle of the night, like I am like, oh, you know, it'd be a great idea for a landing page. And I don't know how I got this way, but it's what I like to do. And I think it's so much fun, because I think the thing that's so fun to me about marketing is just the feedback loop of it, which is like, I'm obsessed with the, like, creating something, putting it out into the world, and then like seeing the reaction. And that could be on the smallest scale, LinkedIn post. On the biggest scale, it could be, you know, an event with 2,000 people, and you're on stage and you can actually hear the buzz in the room. And so that's what I love. And so it's what I think about. You know, we'll go out, I'll go out to lunch with my family on a Saturday, and I'll be like, wow, that restaurant has a really cool brand.
Yeah.
And I'll just, you know, start to go, or I'll go for a drive to go get a coffee. And in that 10-minute car ride, I got my phone out and I'm recording a podcast on my phone. And so I think, you know, B2B, B2C, whatever, I've realized that marketing is the thing that I like to do and I like to talk about. And so that's where the passion comes from.
amazing.
Yeah, it really shows, you know, your passion to it, and we're all junkies in marketing. We need the feedback, I guess.
Yeah.
We need the feedback. All right, so let's start with quick questions.
Yeah. We've got those questions we usually go through, and so first question, which I noticed you ask on your podcast as well, is about the marketech stack. So, you know, what's your favorite marketing tool these days, or tools? Do share.
Oh man! All right, I'm tired of plugging Gong, but I plug Gong a lot because
that's fine. We love plugging Gong as well.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I love the company. I love Udi, and obviously, you know, you guys have done a great job helping build that brand. But I recommend Gong a lot, because I think that you know, it's easy to be obsessed with tools that are gonna. Everybody's chasing, like, what's the one thing that I could optimize to give me another percentage on my website? And I think, especially with what we've seen with like AI, like let's use Facebook for an example, right? Even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, setting up Facebook ads was a huge pain in the ass. Now Facebook just wants you to upload the creative, and they're going to take care of the rest, right? That everything is getting smart with AI and everything. So, and also my bias is not typically towards the super techie stuff. That's more for my friend Guillaume, who kind of the growth wizard side of things. But for me, the reason I love Gong is because I'll give you an example. When I started at Privy, I was new to e-commerce, new to the whole Shopify ecosystem. And I needed to just learn about the market and get up to speed. And no sales rep likes when you go sit at their desk and you listen to calls. Yeah. But instead, what was amazing was I got the Gong app on my phone. And for the first 2 weeks at the company, I just stopped listening to podcasts and stopped listening to music. And I just listened to Gong calls while I went for a walk, while I worked out. And I was able to just like drink from the fire hose and learn. I think the most powerful thing you can hear is the words of your customers. And so true. Gong was great to be able to do that. Outside of Gong, right now at Privy, we're using HubSpot for website and kind of marketing automation and all that stuff. That was in place before I joined, and it works and it's great. So we just have that and Salesforce. Let's see, what else could I tell you? We use Transistor to host our podcast. I recommend Transistor a lot. It's affordable. It's really easy to use. It's how you get a podcast into iTunes. And then on the sales side, we're just rolling out Chili Piper, which is a different way a more efficient way for the reps to book meetings. But it's pretty simple. We're roughly roughly a $10 million-ish company, and so I think keep the tech stack simple. Like if you are less than 50 million in ARR and you got 50 different tech tools, like you're either spending for stuff that you're not using or spending your time on things that are not delivering value. And so I think less is more. Those are a couple of things I like.
So true, and I think specifically to Gong and specifically to the early stages, like the most important thing are what drives your clients, what are their pains, how do they, I think, articulate and define it. And many people talk about Gong as a tool for sales, but I think it's a killer tool for marketing, especially for the early days when you need to understand what the hell people care about.
We actually have, at Firebolt, we run sort of Gong happy hours. So, we it's sort of a demo call watch party. Each one grabs a beer and we sit down and, listen to the best calls of the week. It's priceless, the value that it delivers.
I think what it does, the reason I love it is because I've always been in marketing, and one thing that drove me nuts about salespeople, I love salespeople, but we got some friction, obviously.
Obviously. One
thing that drove me nuts is this perception that, well, marketer Dave, you're not on the phone, so you can't possibly understand what's going on. And I'm like, well, I listen to the same call. And so unless you and I clearly are going to listen to the same facts and interpret them differently, I think it levels the playing field for sales and marketing in that I can listen to those calls. In the same vein, I can be like, oh, wow, we're not doing a good enough job with our messaging and our website and positioning. People don't understand it. So I think it really levels the playing field from let's let everyone hear directly from our customers. Also, the thing that's powerful about Gong is that no matter how many, I'm sure you guys feel this in your business, but if you listen to 100 calls on Gong, 80% of those calls, the same 2 or 3 questions are going to come up.
Yeah.
It's never like, oh my God, there's so many things, I can't keep track of all of them. And so like in that example that I mentioned with Privy, where I did a sprint for 2 weeks and listened to calls, I didn't learn everything, but I kind of learned like the 80-20 of what is happening in the business. And I think that's a really helpful exercise to know that, like, look, it's not 100 different things. It's these 2 or 3 things, right? The 80-20 principle always applies, and especially applies to calls with customers.
Yeah. They also define the competitive landscape really in an interesting way, because they say, we love company X, but, and then you just wait for the but, and then that's your ammunition.
We use it in a bunch of interesting ways. Like we wanted to know, at Privy, we've made our podcast a really central part of the marketing funnel. And we've looked at, we can go into Gong and say, how often is our podcast coming up on calls, both a customer saying, I heard about you from the podcast, but also our sales team saying like, hey, do you want to learn more about like marketing and growing your business while you're, around? You should listen to our podcast. And so like, that's been a metric that we've looked at to see, is this growing outside of like, well, how much revenue has the podcast generated? That's been a great way for us to measure that.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
All right, great. So which brands do you love the most? Either tech, non-tech, B2B, B2C?
My all-time favorite brand is Nike. And, I think there's a couple reasons why. One is I think they have never led with like, buy our new shoes, and they have, they talk about specs and features, right? It's always been, do you want to like back to like Michael Jordan days? Do you want to be like Michael Jordan, right? You want to wear his shoes. You want to wear Jordans, right? Yeah. That's the ultimate measure of a brand is, can you see your, can you give somebody a superpower? And that's the feeling that Nike has had. I love them also just from a design perspective. I think the font and the brand is very clean. They always use real people, very colorful, images. And I'm sure you guys have taken some inspiration from brands like Nike is a great one. I also think they've always done like maybe once every couple months they have an ad that really like punches you in the gut.
Yeah. They're bold.
Yeah. They're so good at getting that, whether it was like original Tiger Woods when he first came out on the PGA Tour, and they just go to YouTube and just type up like classic Nike commercials, and I think you'll be able to get it a little bit better than I'm articulating. But I love Nike. In the tech space, I think the strongest brand right now, or one that I like the most, is Shopify.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Shopify, the reason I love Shopify, obviously, we have a good relationship with them from a Privy standpoint, but their messaging is not use our website to sell things online, right? Their whole story is use our website to sell things online so you can quit your job that you don't like, so you can get the freedom of being an entrepreneur, right? They have that messaging, but also they have this other messaging, which is like their whole, if you've ever listened to Harley, who's their president, talk about Shopify, he always talks about we're arming the rebels
against Amazon.
Against Amazon. Enemy of Amazon. And so like they have a great mission as a brand, but also they have this big, like, they have this big screw you to Amazon, and they have named an enemy, which I think is like the most powerful thing you can do from a brand perspective. And so I think they're one to watch. And obviously over the last year, they've grown like crazy. So those are two that I pay close attention to.
Awesome. So next up is an awesome win that you recall, something that's, truly goes down in the history books, something that delivered great impact, and something ideally people will be able to learn from.
There's a lot. So let's take them all. No,
all right. We have time.
I think one of the most meaningful. I think one of the best feelings I've had in my career was the very first year when I was at Drift, when we did our event called Hypergrowth, because we were an early stage company at that time. This was almost pre-conversational marketing. And I got a challenge from the CEO, David, of we said we're going to do our first user conference. He said, hey, I want you to let's do an event. We've been in business for a year now. It's time for us we have enough customers. Let's do our first user conference. And like most marketing managers, I said, great. Let's do a user conference, 75 people. What do you think? 75 people in a Marriott. And he was like, no. I was like, all right, cool. How about 250? 250. No. He's like 1,000 people. I want 1,000 people there in the first year. And we probably had an email list of like, I don't know, 6,000 people at the time. It was insane. And we did it. We had over 1,000 people came. The place, they had to call the fire marshal. We forgot it was so hot and sweaty. And it just was like, it was the first time in my career that you do marketing, so much of it is online.
Yeah.
But there was something about that where I was standing on this stage, looking out at literally faces of 1,000 people who said, you know what, I'm going to take a day out of my week to come and hang out with this company. That was the like holy shit moment for me, where wow, there's something much bigger here than a technology company. And that was something that I'll always think back to and build on.
How did you make them come?
Well, so there wasn't one particular thing. I think ultimately the reason that they came was because we created a connection with people that went beyond us selling marketing tools. And so they didn't come because they were like, yeah, I'm going to learn about, 2 new ways to optimize my Facebook ads at this event. And we didn't even publish the agenda, really. They came because they were like, I like this brand. I like what they stand for. And so we created this movement, which is all about no lead forms at the time. And that was really about like doing marketing differently, treating customers like people. And what happened is when we put those messages out in the world, all these marketers from all these other companies kind of raised their hands and were like, yes, this take
no
me.
lead form.
This is the brand. Even before they knew what we did from a business, they didn't know, they weren't even using our product, but they were like, I like these guys. I like what this company stands for. I want to be a part of this movement. And so it's why I use that Shopify example. It's like we created something bigger, right? And if you go to Shopify, like use the Shopify example, there's a movement bigger than the fact that they make a website that you can sell stuff on, right? If you go to Nike, there's an example that, they're not just selling sneakers and t-shirts. And I think we were able to channel that at Drift, but that's not from some marketing hack. I think one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and I talk a lot about that pisses people off, is I said, life is too short to work for a CEO who doesn't understand marketing.
Right.
And in that case, and I have it again now at Privy, but I've been lucky to work directly for a CEO who believes in marketing, who's bought in on marketing, who's not like, well, what was what's the pipeline that we generated from those 2 podcasts that you did last week, Dave? And so I think that those are 2 things that have allowed me to do that type of marketing, is like to work for founders who want to build brands, to work for founders who want to invest in marketing. Look at some of the greatest CEOs that you can think of, whether it's Mark Benioff or Steve Jobs or like Richard Branson, Elon Musk, right? Those people are all CEOs who are like, they're marketers. They're not.
They don't get marketing. They do marketing.
They are marketeers.
They do marketing, right?
Yeah.
Why has there never been a CMO of Apple, right? Steve Jobs probably just churns through marketing people because he had to be the one to write the headline. Mm-hmm. He had to be the one to set the tone. And so I think like that's the level. If you want to create a brand that has that type of movement and that feeling, that doesn't get set because you hire some marketer. What happened at Drift was David had that vision. We got matched up together and it took off and I helped light that flame, but that doesn't happen. It's not like I came into the company and said, here's a vision of how we're going to do marketing. It has to start with the CEO. And I'm sure you guys feel this in like the companies that you work with, right? The best companies that you have, the ones that have the most success and the ones that do the coolest things with you guys, it's not the CMO who's pushing for some big project. It's like, no, the CEO really believes in marketing and wants us to do this.
Exactly. I think Udi said it also in his podcast. He said, here's a tip for CMOs with CEOs that don't believe in marketing. Go find another job. Exactly.
And look, people say, well, Dave, how do you know? How do you know? Can you define that? No, I can't define it. It's a feeling. It's a feeling, right? You ever walk into a restaurant and like 2 seconds into the restaurant, you're like, oh yeah, this place is legit, right?
Yeah.
It's a similar thing. And so like that's gotta be, and look, when you're 24 years old in your marketing career, you're not going to get your choice. You don't get to go pick your job based on whether the CEO, gets it or not. But as you progress, that 100% should be a criteria for what job. And especially if you're going to be the marketing leader, whether you're CMO or VP or whatever, you got to have that tight relationship with the CEO where they get marketing and they want to riff on that. And I can't tell you how many times, at Drift, for example, even and now at Privy, like I'm getting texts about marketing ideas from the CEO, not not, hey, there was a typo in this blog post, but like, oh,
Yeah.
what if we did this? What if we partnered with this company and did this crazy thing? Like, that's the relationship that you got to have.
It's amazing. Unfortunately, today, that's the exception. I don't think it's the norm. You know, the amount of CEOs who truly get marketing is not enough.
Not yet, but we witnessed that there's a certain change, I think. CEOs at least understand that the responsibility is on them and they have to take part, and it's not just the job of the CMO.
I think what one thing that one way that I see that mistake get made is that, like, there's usually two founders of a company, right? At least one of them is the CEO, one of them is the technical founder, oftentimes.
Yeah.
And I think what has to happen is the CEO has to make it clear, if you guys are co-founders, how are you splitting up the responsibilities of the business? And so, like, in the case of Drift, for example, it was like David, the CEO, is going to like take marketing under his wing. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on that together, where Elias, the other founder, is like going to be responsible for the technology side. I don't see enough like CEOs who say like, oh, well, here's how I'm splitting this up in the early days. And as we build out this company, like, I'm going to be involved in marketing. I think you got to be involved in marketing more so than you are in accounting and finance. Like, and fundraising. Marketing is the thing. And my favorite thing when it comes to this is, I think this is a line from Andy Raskin, but he talks about how your story is your strategy.
Your strategy, yeah. The strategic narrative.
And so, you know, like, there's a bunch of ways you can think about that. At Privy, for example, our story is we are the all-in-one platform for small brands who want to grow on Shopify. That's a strategy also, right? Because if you have that clear, that then dictates what decisions you make as a business, who you partner with, which campaigns you run, right? Go to Drift. In the case of Drift, once we nailed down conversational marketing, that then dictates how we position our other products, the type of things that we need to build, why we came up with the whole no lead forms movement, right? HubSpot, inbound marketing, right? That is their story. That is their strategy. Their strategy is inbound marketing. So they're going to have to create content about how to teach you how to do it. You're not going to see them partnering with companies that do, you know, heavy outbound. That's not in their brand, right? And so I think that's so important to nail, because it dictates all of the other decisions that you're going to make.
Yeah.
We're big believers in that. We always say that, you know, the best go-to-market strategy, product strategy, is the brand narrative or the strategic narrative. It really
too many people get so caught up in these freaking like positioning docs, and they think that your company's story is going to be I got this great Google Doc, I got this great template, and I'm going to fill it out, and the template is what's going to give me the messaging. No. Like, I'll give you another example from DGMG, which is my group for marketing people, for B2B marketers. After months of doing it, I had this epiphany. Oh, here's the mission. Nobody went to school for B2B marketing.
Right.
And so that's the mission that DGMG exists to solve. I don't need a freaking 5-page positioning doc. That's my that is my positioning, right?
Exactly.
That then dictates which types of content should I produce? What things should I talk about? It's the same thing. You don't need to come up with this 5-page for who, does what, brand differentiator, segment. Like, if you have that one line, now it comes back to the CEO having a vision, right? It's clear, like, especially if you're a marketer interviewing for a job at an executive level, if you got to go into that meeting with the CEO and say, oh my gosh, I know the vision, right? I'm sure early days of Gong, right? Udi walks in with a meet and was like, oh, I get it. I got to be part of this. I totally get it.
Exactly. That's why we believe the CEO must lead the strategic narrative and the brand. You know, he's the North Star, essentially, with everything that got to do where the company is heading. He's the one that needs to inspire, you know, the employees, the investors, the market. So it have to be the CEO. All right, just now to bring you down a bit. So tell us about one glorious fail and what can be learned from it, maybe.
So I haven't had one big glorious failure, and I know people don't like hearing that, because it sounds like ego.
Sounds cocky.
It sounds like ego, and it sounds like hubris. But The reason is, and I definitely fail every day. Like there's things that just don't work for sure. But the reason that I haven't had one big failure is because I think my approach to marketing is very much like do your work in public. And so I'm using content and social media to always test ideas. And so I have a really good feeling for like if something is going to work or not. Very rarely am I like, oh, I got this idea. I can't tell anyone about it. I'm going to go dark for 2 months and then I'm going to launch it. Yeah. That's how you have a humongous failure. Instead, what I'm doing is always kind of putting out things into the world. Hey, you know, it'd be interesting. What if somebody did this, right? This goes all the way back to the very first podcast that I launched was in 2014. It was called Tech in Boston. I tweeted out, I had no audience then, but I tweeted out like, how come nobody has a podcast for startups in Boston? And somebody tweeted back at me and said, why don't you start one? Huh, okay, great. So I've already kind of foolproof tested that idea, right? Yeah. You can do this if you have any audience at any scale, like to be able to put content out. And so I'm always trying to like be very open about what I'm doing and what I'm working on to test ideas. Like let's say you want to do an event, you want to do a 1,000-person event. Well, we kind of already had a gut feeling from the reaction to our content, to our audience, to how quickly we built up an email list and social following that, there's something here. And so if we can get the topics right, I think this is going to work. And so I just believe it's so much in like, I think social media is such a cheat code that most brands just don't use it the right way, right? There's so much hype in the e-commerce world about direct to consumer. Even if you're an enterprise SaaS company, direct to consumer is social media. Like you could be testing out all of the content ideas for your event. You could be testing out your next offer, the next product you want to build through your existing audience. And so like I've tried to avoid huge failures because I always try to avoid like the big reveal, which is like go dark. Not even in like, let's say, hey, we're going to redo the website. Most marketers would say that that's a 6-month project. I would say, hell no. Let's break it down. Let's do the homepage first because that's where 80% of people are going to be. Let's start with a couple versions of the homepage. Let's start to feel this out, get some more data on this thing. Then we can go out and build the full site. That's like how I just try to think about things to break them down into smaller chunks so you can avoid the failure. I think it's just such an advantage to be able to reach people directly, reach your ideal customers online today. I think if you have a dramatic failure, that's on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Aha moments, like people do that way too often. So let's talk a little bit about Drift. Okay, so you've been there from the start. Drift is a massive brand today. Anything we can learn, I guess, about the whole category creation process of conversational marketing, and anything else around that? What the impact was? What was the thought process?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is the CEO match, which is like what we've talked about, which is important. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, speaking of like the thing we just talked about with big failures and learning, we already felt like the category was there before we gave it a name, right? It wasn't like, let's give it a name and hope people take on to this thing. It was like, whoa, the response to this is unlike anything we've ever felt or seen before. There's clearly something here. Then you have the power of naming it, which is like, once we named it conversational marketing, that allowed everybody who was already doing it to say, yes, I'm doing conversational marketing, right? And so I think like it was powerful to name it, but don't be obsessed with. I think there's too many startups that, because category creation is such a hot topic and the thing now, they have no customers and no traction, and they're obsessed with creating the category. Where we spent a solid 1.5 to 2 years at Drift doing business, learning from customers before we named it conversational marketing. And so, yes, I hear you in that you want to create a category and you want to name it, but like you can't do that unless you're putting ideas and content and product into the market and getting that feedback. And so I think it all comes back to the feedback loop. The other thing is a lot of people get so caught up on the name. And I remember that from our time at Drift, which is like, we didn't like the name, but it became such a boiling point that we had to just pick a name and go. And now looking back, nobody hates the name. They're like, yeah, it's conversational marketing, because that's what it is, right? And I even felt this early days of my Tech in Boston podcast, and that I talked about, when people were like, what a dumb Tech in Boston. Like, do you have any creativity, dude? Like just that. But 60 episodes later, people are like, yeah, my favorite podcast is Tech in Boston. Duh. And so I think like you have to pick a lane and commit to something and go. But I also think you need to understand, like, do you need to create a category? I don't think that, I don't think that it's something that everybody has to do, right? If you're going to raise $100 million, like a Drift or whoever else, right? You're trying to build $1 billion company, right? If I'm going to go make a new line of water bottles, I don't always need to go create a new category of water bottles, right? If you go back to, like, let me pull this out because it's right here, but I think one of the most powerful, like, lessons in marketing, okay, it's from this book, 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. Right? Law number 1, the law of leadership. It's better to be first than it is to be better, period. So if you can be the first in something, great. Like, I could talk about DGMG as the first community built for B2B marketers, and that's going to work for a lot of people, right? But if you go to law number 2, do you guys know law number 2 off the top of your head? You do? Law number 2 is a law of the category, which is, if you can't be first, set up a new category that you can be first in. And so right. in the case of Drift, there was 7,000 other tools in sales and marketing already. And so we knew that we weren't going to be able to get initial traction if we just said, we're just like everyone else, except our product works a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right.
And even if you are the best, most game-changing product in the world, nobody's going to believe you. They're skeptical. And so, the whole approach, and this was not marketing buzz. This was like, the reason those two guys started the company was because they wanted to create a new way. So there's no marketing spin that I'm putting on that. That's in the DNA of the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amen to that. We always talk a lot, understand the story, understand the movement that you're making, really know how to articulate that, and then name it. The name is less important. It's important what it stands for. And by the way, choosing, I think, like, the choice itself in marketing is 90% of everything. Like, if it would be something else, not conversational marketing, but whatever, would it work less? I'm not sure. It's about choosing something and going with it, I think. And marketing,
I think it's in a similar vein to, like, one of my biggest pet peeves is when people get more obsessed with, like, thinking about if something is going to scale before they've even done it. Yeah. Which is like, oh my God, but if you give out your email on your podcast and 100 customers email you, how are you going to track that? And my answer is like, that would be a good problem to have. Imagine 100 customers emailed you, right? Yeah. And so, like, so many people are worried about, will it scale versus, like, how about get initial traction and be like, holy shit, this thing has blown up. Let's figure out how to scale it. And I think the same is true. With category, which is like, go that route, get the response from customers, pick a name. And like, naming is such a powerful thing. Just like, even in naming your company, right? Like, you just got to pick a name so someone has something to reference. What you actually call it, the name of the category is very rarely going to be the success factor of the category, right? Like, we could have called, you can't call it like blue crayon marketing, but if it's like remotely close to the core topic and people are already invested in it, it's going to work.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So something you talk a lot in your content and podcast is really how to be seen as an expert in your industry, as a brand. So how do you have a framework for it?
Yeah, the framework is you have to be an expert. Like, you be an expert. Here's an example, right? I'm not an engineer, and so I shouldn't go start a company about helping engineers do their job better. I should go start a company about marketing because I know marketing. I'm an expert in marketing. And so I think to me, it all comes back to the founder, right? It all starts with the founder's story. And for me as a marketer, the number one ingredient that I'm looking at is, what is the founder's story? Isn't there some story, is there some story about Gong and here's an example, Zoom. Eric, the CEO of Zoom.
Yeah.
He was the guy from WebEx.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
So frustrated,
story is-
rightfully
Yeah.
so.
His story is he's already done this at scale. Now he's making the better version. So if I'm the marketing person at that company, my whole job is to try to tell that story.
No,
and lead with
no
that
category,
expertise.
by the way. No
Yeah.
new category there.
No, video
They don't need
conferencing.
one.
That doesn't
Yeah.
suck. So
Yeah.
simple.
But like another example is I went in and bought a new pair of skis a couple weeks ago, and I'm an average skier. I haven't bought skis in 20 years. But I went into the store, and the guy that helped me out was clearly an expert in skiing, and it was an amazing experience. Because I didn't want to talk about features. I want to be like, here's my height, here's my weight, here's my ability. He's like, all right, cool, come with me. Get these. You don't need this. Try this one. This one's a little bit more expensive, but you don't need that. So why don't you get this? That's an amazing experience, right? And I think that's what we all want. There is so much noise and information and BS that comes with brands. Everyone is skeptical. And so the opportunity for you to win as a brand is to be an expert. And so it doesn't mean you have to be an expert at marketing. Like, I don't know anything about cybersecurity, but if I worked at a cybersecurity company, my whole marketing angle would not be to trick people into thinking that I'm the expert, but my marketing would be the guide. Hey, we are here. My company is experts. We're going to help you navigate this thing. And so I think like the best approach to marketing is to be that expert, to be the guide, to be the coach. And I just think that's the approach that's always going to work with people. People want to work with experts. It's like when you go to the doctor, you don't want your doctor to be like, well, you could maybe take some of these or do some of this. I want my doctor to tell me no. Tell me exactly what to do, how much, when. That's the opportunity from a brand perspective.
The tech doctor.
Do you have any tips to how to start? I think many of the clients that we talk to, they are experts, but they don't know how to start. All right, what are the 3 things that I should be doing like tomorrow?
Well, so so number one, ideally the founder has started this company because they are an expert.
Right.
And so that's number one. So like if we use the Zoom example, my whole strategy at Zoom, pretend like they were not a successful company, right? Because this is going to be ridiculous advice. But like my whole strategy would be to tell the founder's story. And that's what we did at Drift, which is like, hey, here's this guy, here's these 2 founders. They spent the last 20 years building sales and marketing software together. And through that experience, which we just built credibility by telling that story, through that experience, they learned that things were broken. And so they started this company, Drift, to show you to create the new way.
Right.
You don't have to know anything about us, but we've already created credibility by telling you that story. And so like, I would start by telling the founder's backstory. Number 2 is I would then find a channel to like share that story directly to the world. I think this is why I love podcasting. I think every founder should have a podcast. I think every founder should be on social media solely to just like tell that story to the world. And the founder doesn't have to know how to do all that. They should have somebody like me, a marketing person who can help like get that story out of them. But that's your best ingredient. Today, people want to work with brands they feel like are credible. They want to work with people that they know and like and trust. So the best way to do that is to make the founder's brand like the centerpiece of your brand. And if you use Drift as an example, when I was there was really 2 brands. There still are today. There's 2 brands. There's the Drift brand and there's David Cancel brand.
Yeah.
Right.
And so my strategy would be, hey, if you hired me to go run that ski shop, my very first thing would be like, who owns a ski shop? What's her story? Oh, she started a story because she's been skiing for 30 years. She was a former Olympic skier. Now she started a ski store. That's always like the best angle if you can really tap into that story.
People also remember stories and relate to stories, so it resonates.
Especially personal stories, of course.
Yeah.
Well, like why do you guys have this? Why do you guys have your company? What's the story?
I was in tech.
I'm still in tech.
He's still in tech.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a brand agency to work with, and I realized that nobody understands what I'm talking about. Because when I talk to brand agencies, they look at me like, so you want it in blue?
So like that story instantly builds credibility with me because I'm like, dude, I've been in the same position. Yes. Okay. Let's talk. Right. And like, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. And by the way, founders are got to be crazy people. And so you got to be crazy enough to start a company in the first place. So there's usually a reason, whether you had some huge problem, or you had some big epiphany, or even you started this company in your dorm room and you've been doing it for 10 years. There's always some like unique, interesting story there that I always would try to lead with. And people, especially with a new brand, people want to work with a person. I don't know your logo yet. You know, if you show up in my Twitter feed, I don't know your logo, but I see your smiling face and I'm like, oh, interesting. That person's the CEO of a podcasting company. And he started a podcasting company because he found some big problem and he's launched 5 podcasts by himself, right? Okay, that instant credibility, like you have to build credibility off the bat. Everyone's going to be skeptical of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I love using podcasts and social media as a way to do that.
So that sort of leads us to the next thing. You know, your writing is amazing. It seems like, you know, we're not the only ones thinking so. But, you know, I guess, you know, what are your copywriting tips? You know, how do you create this awesome copy that seems to work so well and people love? People get engaged. So I don't know. Tell us your secret.
Tell us your secret, man.
Well, so one of them is like you have to do it, and so it's hard. It's hard to give like 1 or 2 copywriting tips because the real answer is like I'm good at copywriting now, but I wasn't 5 or 6 years ago. You know, I used to get like David at Drift used to give me feedback on my writing and like this is not good enough. Like we got to tweak it, right? And so I've written thousands of emails, thousands of headlines, thousands of blog posts that now I could write a great sales email for you guys in 10 minutes. Like if you just sent me a couple things now. So number one is like, you have to do it. And so the reason why I love social media also is because it forces you to become a copywriter. And so a couple of years ago, I made a decision that I'm going to post every day on LinkedIn. Not to build an audience, I think that's a secondary effect of it, but to find my voice. It forced me to become a better writer, and now I can like spit stuff out on demand. And so if you're sitting listening to this saying like I want to become a better copywriter, but like I don't send my companies, just do it. Like writing. Open up go to Chrome, type in docs.new, open a Google Doc, and once a day write something. Like that's the easiest way to do it. You can just do that on demand. That's how I use social media. So I think you got to write it. Number 2 is find people or brands that you think do copywriting well. And so for me, that was Apple and Nike. And so I would go read press releases from Apple and press releases from Nike and add copy from Apple and add copy from Nike and try to figure out like, how do they talk? What words do they use? And try to take that. Like you guys are not an athletic apparel company, but I bet you could write a headline from your website that you could kind of take from Nike, right? Try to find the patterns. And then ultimately, like you have to write to one person. And so I always try to write very informal. I try to write like myself, and I try to use like very short, choppy copy that has a rhythm to it, because it's like the goal of your first line of copy is to get somebody to read the second line. The goal of the second line of copy is to get somebody to read the third, and so on and so on and so on. And it doesn't mean you have to write one of those annoying, like, you know, 1 word, 1 line LinkedIn posts. But like, instead of starting, like, here's how I might send you an invite to a webinar. Instead of saying like, hello, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time, we are hosting a webinar with my friends at Gong.io. I would write that email like this. So this morning I was dropping my daughter off at school and I had this idea, which is, how come we've never done a webinar with our friends at Gong? So tomorrow at 2 p.m., like that's the same message, but it's completely different. I've hooked you right away. I've built a connection with you right away. And you got to write like a person.
Mm-hmm. Right, the way you talk,
which is you also have to know who you are as the writer. So here's an example. I know marketing. I'm comfortable positioning myself as an expert in marketing. So the way I write is I'm the expert. I'm here to teach you. Let's say I was working at a cybersecurity company where I'm not the expert. I would take a different approach, which is like, I am not the expert. I am the guide. Our CTO is the expert. And so I'm going to, this is an interview with him and I've learned from that person. So like, you have to decide, are you the expert? Are you the guide? And then how are you going to use that angle to then go and write your copy? Because I think, look, one of the biggest things that's broken in our world, B2B, SaaS in particular, is like, how can you expect a 23-year-old BDR to cold email a CMO of $1 billion company and get them to book a meeting and pretend to be an expert. It's not going to happen. There's no way that 23-year-old BDR knows more about marketing than Udi at Gong. But if that BDR took the approach of, I'm not an expert, but I'm the guide, my company is, and I'm the guide, and I'm going to help you improve your job, that person's going to have much more success trying to book a meeting with Udi.
Makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
All right, to the next one. In your podcast, you're asking a lot about the marketing org chart. How should it looks like? So what's your take on that? What's like the ideal one?
Also, the first hire, it's a topic that keeps coming up. So
yeah, who are your first three hires? Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
So I actually hate the org chart question because I think a lot of people will just try to do exactly whatever somebody says. And I think the number one thing you have to do is assess. You have to do an assessment of like, what's your team look like already? What is your skill set? What kind of budget do you have? Who can you go hire? And so if you're the first marketing person, like at Drift, for example, my background is more like writing, communication, product marketing. And so I needed to focus on that stuff as part of my job and then hire around me versus if you are the first hire at a startup and you're very analytical, you're a demand gen person, your first hire shouldn't be another demand gen person. You should say, okay, I'm going to do this as 30% of my job. My first hire should be a designer or a content person. I think so much of it is dependent on like your team makeup. I also think the next question you have to ask yourself is what are the goals of the company, right? Do you need to grow leads really quickly? Then don't go and hire a content person or a blogger and have them write 50 blog articles in their first 2 months. Go and hire that like paid SEO, SEM type of person to quickly get traffic. So like a lot of it is nuanced based on your company. But I think I like, and I made a little like, let me pull this up because I made a little graphic on it recently. Well, I have no design skills, so you know that I didn't make the graphic. But my first I got three people that I recommend for being your first marketing hires, and I can't find it, but it's basically like a promoter, a designer, and a writer. I noticed that I didn't say product marketing or demand gen or SEO. Like the promoter is who's gonna get the word out about your company. You need, and that could be word out, meaning many things. It could be through advertising, it could be through content, but like somebody has to own getting the word out because nobody's just gonna come to you. So who's gonna promote your stuff? You need a designer because design is the backbone of everything. And every time I've not had a designer in a situation that you're screwed. And so you need somebody who can create a landing page, create a graphic, create a nice little, quote image for social media. You need somebody who can just like crank out on the design, production design type stuff. And then the last one is you need a writer because, and I'm not saying blogger, I'm saying writer. You want a writer who can write you everything from website copy to blog post to email copy because everything has writing on it. And in the early days of a company, if you just hire a blogger, your sales team is going to need a bunch of sales email, but your blogger is going to be like, I don't know how to write email copy. So if you take the mindset of more like, I'm a writer who can then do writing in whatever way you need it. I just love that as a framework. Like, hey, we need an article. Great, I got you. Hey, we need 5 new sales emails. Great, I can go write those. The promoter, the designer, the writer, those are the 3 kind of people that I think. But ultimately, I think it's different at every company. Who else is on the team, the stage, all that stuff matters.
That's great. Makes a lot of sense.
All right, let's talk a bit about DGMG. Tell us a bit about the group. By the way, it's a great group and I think a must read and a must have for any marketer out there. So DGMG, guys. Yeah. So what's next? What is the Vault?
So I started this because I wasn't sure after Drift, I wasn't sure how much I was going to continue talking about marketing in the way that I love it. Cause I going to Privy and e-commerce and small businesses. So I wanted to just have my own podcast where I could talk about marketing. And I decided to launch it on Patreon because I was like, there might be an interesting thing here where I could build I had an audience on LinkedIn and through some other places. And so like, I kind of had already tested the content. And so I said, hey, I'm going to launch this. It's going to be behind a paywall. It's $10 a month. But within a couple months, it really grew really quickly. And I didn't expect it to. I thought it was just going to be like a little community of my own. The thing that it pivoted to is not just my private podcast, but it's like everybody in B2B marketing has no idea what they're doing. We're all in this together. It's such a weird, unique place that the opportunity quickly became people were like, hey, do you have any templates for this? Does anybody have an agency that they can recommend for this? Hey, who do you hire for this? Or has anybody worked with this company? And so it really quickly morphed into this community of like, oh yeah, this is a place for B2B marketers to go to learn more about marketing from me and other people that I can interview, but also as a community share ideas with each other. And so it's something that I'm continuing to build on the side. And I really think there's a good opportunity to just make it the number one place to go if you want to learn more about B2B marketing. I mentioned this to you guys earlier, but the tagline that I came up with is because no one went to school for B2B marketing. I think that is the value, which is, hey, for $100 a year, you can get access to this community where like you're going to learn a ton, because oftentimes you're so insulated inside of your company, right? You're a marketing team of 1 or maybe 3. There's so much value in getting outside of your company. Nobody's going to events right now. There is no networking happening. And so like, it's been a unique time this year to be able to like build DGMG in tandem. So you can just search for it online. You'll find it. Go and check it out.
Highly recommended, guys.
Okay, Dave, that's been really great. Any famous last words?
No, this was, I'm going to lose my voice now. You got me going. This is very enjoyable.
Good stuff.
Dave, thanks so much.
Thank you. And we'll be in touch soon.